Be careful who you investigate, because some people aren't hiding skeletons in their closets. They're hiding kingdoms. My beloved anointed ones, if you're watching this at 2 a.m. with tears in your eyes, wondering if God has forgotten your name, this is not a coincidence. Nothing about this moment is random. The very fact that these words are reaching your ears right now, that's divine orchestration. They thought they could expose you. They hired investigators, sent watchers, dug through your past like grave robbers searching for bones. But what they found, what they uncovered about you, made the darkness itself take 3 steps back. You see, there's something the enemy never calculated. While they were busy trying to destroy your reputation, God was busy building your revelation. While they searched for your secrets, heaven was sealing your destiny. And somewhere between their schemes and God's sovereignty, they made a fatal mistake. They discovered you weren't the victim they thought you were destroying. You were the weapon God had been forging in silence. What if I told you that every betrayal, every attack, every moment they tried to tear you down was actually God allowing them to dig their own graves? What if those private investigators, those whispered conversations, those attempts to find dirt on you, were actually divine setups? Because here's what they found when they dug deep enough. They found fingerprints. Not yours. God's, all over your story. All over your pain. All over your seemingly impossible survival. They thought they were investigating a person. They discovered they were investigating a phenomenon. And to every single one of you who has supported this message through super thanks, your generosity means more than you know. You're not just donating, you're helping spread light to others who feel alone in their calling. Whether you give or not, I'm deeply grateful for your presence here, your support, your time, your attention. It all matters. And if this message resonates with your soul, go ahead and plant that seed of support if you feel led. Tonight, you're going to discover what that investigator found in your file that made them quit the case. You're going to learn why your enemies suddenly went quiet, why the attacks stopped, why even your betrayers can't sleep at night anymore. Because what they uncovered about you wasn't just evidence of who you are. It was proof of whose you are. And what happened next made the darkness tremble. Buckle up, chosen one. This isn't just your vindication, this is your revelation. They hired a professional, someone with 20 years in the field, trained to uncover what people desperately try to hide. Cold, calculating, methodical. The kind of investigator who could find a needle in a haystack and tell you who put it there. But you, chosen one, you broke their system. Picture this, a seasoned private eye, sitting in a dimly lit office at 11 p.m., surrounded by manila folders and computer screens. Coffee gone cold hours ago. Eyes bloodshot from staring at documents that should have painted a clear picture of your life, should have revealed your weaknesses, your failures, your hidden shame. Instead, they found something that made them push back from their desk and whisper, "What in God's name?" They came expecting to catalog your mistakes. What they discovered was a masterpiece written in scars. You see, beloved, what the enemy meant for investigation, heaven turned into revelation. Every document they pulled, every witness they interviewed, every timeline they tried to piece together, it all pointed to the same impossible conclusion. You weren't just surviving life's storms, you were walking on water through them. The investigators started noticing patterns that defied logic. How you emerged from betrayals stronger, not bitter. How losses that should have destroyed you somehow refined you instead. How people who tried to tear you down mysteriously found themselves examining their own lives, questioning their own motives. They thought they were building a case against you. God was building a testimony through you. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night. The investigator was reviewing your timeline, the year everything fell apart. The year they expected to find you at your lowest, your most vulnerable, your most defeated. But as they traced your steps through that valley of shadows, something extraordinary appeared in the data. You didn't fall, you rose. You didn't run, you stood. You didn't flinch, you smiled. And in that moment, sitting alone in that sterile office, surrounded by evidence of your resilience, the investigator realized something that chilled them to the bone. They weren't investigating a person. They had stumbled into prophecy. Your scars weren't just wounds that healed. They were sacred scrolls, each one inscribed with divine purpose. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was the sound of heaven holding its breath, waiting for your moment. Your tears weren't defeat. They were liquid prayers that moved the very throne of God. The investigator reached for their phone to call their client, to report what they'd found, but their hand trembled. Because how do you explain to someone that the person they wanted destroyed is protected by forces that don't show up in background checks? How do you tell someone that the chosen one they hired you to expose has God's fingerprints all over their story? They came for your secrets, beloved. They found sacred territory. They thought they were digging up dirt. They discovered they were standing on holy ground. And somewhere, between their skepticism and God's sovereignty, the shovel broke, not the ground, the shovel. Because some stories belong to heaven. They thought you were being elusive. They assumed your silence meant you had something to hide. But they got it all wrong, didn't they? You weren't hiding. You were watching. While they scrambled with their little notebooks and surveillance gadgets, thinking they were the hunters, you were already 10 moves ahead. You saw them coming before they even knew they were sent. You watched their patterns, their tells, their desperate attempts to find cracks in a foundation they couldn't even comprehend. See, chosen one, what they never understood is that you've been trained by fire to observe before you speak, to see before you react, to know before you move. You don't live on the surface like they do, jumping at every shadow, reacting to every provocation. You live in the deep waters where wisdom dwells. You weren't the subject of their investigation. You were the surveillance. Every conversation they thought was casual, you were reading the subtext. Every smile they flashed, you saw the agenda behind it. Every question they posed as innocent curiosity, you understood the trap they were setting. They thought they were studying you, but honey, you were studying them right back, and you were better at it. The eyes of the righteous see farther than the schemes of the wicked. You've been watching people your whole life, haven't you? Not because you're paranoid, but because survival taught you to pay attention. Betrayal taught you to notice the small things. Disappointment taught you to trust your instincts over pretty words. You learned to see the pause before the lie, the hesitation before the attack, the shift in energy before the storm. While they were busy trying to catch you off guard, you were cataloging their weaknesses. While they plotted in whispers, you were already writing their ending. They thought they were the investigators, but you were the archivist of their own downfall. You didn't hide because you had nothing to hide from. You observed because that's what warriors do. That's what survivors do. That's what the chosen do. You position yourself where you can see everything and be touched by nothing. And here's what really broke them. When they finally realized you weren't running, weren't hiding, weren't even concerned. When they understood that you had been watching them the entire time with the calm patience of someone who already knew how this story ended, that's when they knew they were outmatched. You weren't playing defense. You were never even on their battlefield. You were above it, beyond it, watching it like a general surveys a valley before deciding which mountains to move. They came looking for secrets. What they found was a sentinel. They came searching for weakness. What they discovered was a watchtower. They expected to find someone scrambling in the shadows. Instead, they encountered someone who had been standing in the light all along, seeing everything, missing nothing, and waiting with the kind of divine patience that only comes from knowing God is writing the final chapter. You weren't the mystery they thought they were solving. You were the solution to a problem they didn't even know they had. And the moment they realized that, the moment they understood you had been the one watching them all along, that's when the real investigation began. And this time, they were the ones under the microscope. They thought fear would break you. It backfired. When that investigator opened your file, they expected to find the usual story: broken dreams, shattered trust, maybe some therapy records, medication bottles, or the remnants of a life that couldn't handle the pressure. They were hunting for weakness, searching for the cracks where your foundation had crumbled. But what they found made them put down their pen and stare at the pages in disbelief. You see, beloved, they traced your trauma and found a temple. Where they expected rubble, they discovered blueprints. Every scar on your soul wasn't evidence of defeat. It was architectural genius. You didn't just survive what was meant to kill you. You studied it. You translated it. You turned your deepest wounds into holy strategy. While others were medicated, you were educated. While others were broken, you were being rebuilt with materials stronger than what you started with. That pain that kept you up at night, that wasn't torture, that was training. God was teaching you to see in the dark, to breathe underwater, to stand when the ground beneath you turned to quicksand. You didn't just heal from your trauma, you didn't just recover from it, you evolved into something death couldn't digest. That's what shook the investigator to their core. They were looking for a victim story, but they found a victor's manual. Every betrayal became a lesson in discernment. Every loss became training in letting go. Every attack became practice in standing unmoved when the storms hit. You didn't fight fire with fire. You transcended the battlefield entirely. See, most people think healing means going back to who you were before the pain hit. But God had a different plan for you. He wasn't interested in restoration. He was orchestrating transformation. The old version of you couldn't handle what was coming. So he allowed the fire to burn away everything that wasn't built to last. What emerged from those ashes wasn't wounded. What emerged was weaponized. You learned the language of suffering so fluently that now you can translate pain into purpose for others. You mastered the art of endurance so completely that what breaks ordinary people just bounces off you like rain off a roof. You developed spiritual muscle memory that kicks in automatically when trouble shows up. That investigator thought they were reading about someone who got hurt. Instead, they were reading about someone who got initiated into a level of strength most people will never understand. Your pain wasn't punishment, chosen one. It was preparation. You didn't fall. You rose. You didn't run. You stood. You didn't flinch. You smiled. And now, when the enemy looks at you, they don't see the person they once attacked. They see the weapon they accidentally helped create. They see someone who turned their worst nightmare into their greatest advantage. The trauma they meant to destroy you with, it became the very thing that made you indestructible. You didn't just heal, beloved. You evolved into something the darkness had never seen before. Your silence confused them more than your words ever could. They expected screaming. They waited for the breakdown, the public meltdown, the moment you'd crack under pressure and spill everything like a broken dam. They had their cameras ready, their recorders running, waiting for you to hand them the ammunition they needed to finish what they started. But you never gave it to them. While they threw accusations like stones, you stood there like a mountain, unmoved, unshaken, silent as the grave, and that silence, that terrified them more than any defense you could have mounted. You see, beloved, they didn't understand what they were dealing with. They thought your quiet meant you were empty. They assumed your stillness meant you were weak. But what they couldn't see was that your silence wasn't a void waiting to be filled. Your silence was a vault, locked, sealed, containing truth so powerful they could reshape their entire world. You didn't lose your voice. You locked it behind divine timing. Inside that vault of your silence sat dynamite wrapped in discernment, truth so sharp it could cut through their lies like a sword through silk, evidence so damning it would expose not just their schemes, but their souls. You held the keys to their destruction, and they never even knew it. But here's what made you dangerous, chosen one. You understood something they never learned. Some explosions are delayed on purpose to deliver maximum impact. You weren't being passive. You were being precise. Every day you stayed quiet. Every moment you refused to take their bait. You were loading the chamber, waiting, watching, timing the moment when your truth would land with the force of heaven's own justice. They called your silence weakness. God called it wisdom. While they wasted their ammunition on empty shots, you conserved yours. While they exhausted themselves throwing punches at shadows, you gathered strength. Your restraint wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Divine strategy. The kind that makes angels lean forward in anticipation. You didn't stay quiet because you had nothing to say. You stayed quiet because you had everything to say. And you knew the appointed hour hadn't come yet. That investigator kept digging, kept probing, trying to crack your composure. They studied your face for tells, analyzed your responses for weakness. But what they found instead was something that made their blood run cold. They found someone who wasn't hiding from the truth. They found someone who was the truth, walking, breathing, waiting. Your silence became their prison. Every day you didn't speak was another day they had to wonder what you knew. Every moment you held your peace was another moment they questioned their own security. Your quiet became louder than their noise. Your stillness became more terrifying than their chaos. Because deep in their hearts, they knew. They knew you weren't silent because you were defeated. You were silent because you were deliberate. You weren't quiet because you were empty. You were quiet because you were full of truths they couldn't afford to have exposed. And when the time comes, beloved, when heaven gives the signal and divine timing aligns with earthly justice, your silence will break like thunder. Your voice will rise like resurrection morning. And every word you've held back will hit with the force of delayed divine justice. Your silence was never weakness. It was holy weaponry. Loaded. Aimed. Waiting for God's green light. And they were never ready for that kind of war. They thought fear would break you. It backfired. You see, my beloved chosen one, when that investigator opened your file, expecting to find a typical recovery story, they weren't prepared for what stared back at them from those pages. They thought they'd see someone picking up pieces, gluing back fragments of a shattered life, maybe some therapy sessions, some self-help books, a few motivational quotes taped to your bathroom mirror. But that's not what they found. What they discovered was something that made them close the file and sit back in their chair, shaking their head in disbelief. Because you didn't heal back to who you were. You mutated into something they'd never seen before. Healing is predictable. Healing follows patterns. Healing says, let's get you back to normal. But you looked normal in the face and said, I'm not going back to that version. That version wasn't built for what's coming. They expected to find someone patching wounds with band-aids and hope. Instead, they found someone who took their pain and forged it into armor. Someone who didn't just survive the fire, you learned to breathe in the flames. You didn't come out wounded, you came out weaponized. The old you would have been terrified by this new you. The old you asked permission. This you declares. The old you sought approval. This you commands respect by simply existing. The old you worried about fitting in. This you makes the room adjust to your frequency. You weren't restored. You were reinvented by divine fire. See, here's what shook that investigator to their core. They realized they weren't looking at someone who had simply bounced back. They were staring at evidence of metamorphosis. Like watching a caterpillar's DNA completely rewrite itself in the cocoon, you didn't emerge with wings, you emerged with authority. Your nervous system rewired itself. Your intuition sharpened like a blade. Your discernment became surgical. Your boundaries became unbreachable walls with gates that only open for those who earn the right to enter. They thought you were healing, but you were becoming unbreakable. The betrayals that should have left you bitter taught you to taste lies before they even leave someone's lips. The abandonments that should have made you clingy taught you the holy power of your own company. The attacks that should have left you paranoid gave you eyes that see through every mask, every performance, every false smile. You didn't get better. You got dangerous. Dangerous to every lie that tries to take root in your presence. Dangerous to every manipulator who thinks they can read you like they read everyone else. Dangerous to every system built on the assumption that broken people stay broken. What they found in your file wasn't a recovery timeline. It was a transformation so complete, so thorough, so divinely orchestrated that it read like science fiction. They saw someone who didn't just heal from trauma, you alchemized it. You turned every wound into wisdom, every scar into strength, every betrayal into a boundary that protects not just you, but everyone who finds shelter in your presence. You didn't patch yourself up. You rebuilt your entire operating system. And now you walk through this world like someone who knows secrets the darkness wishes it could erase, because you do. You know that what doesn't kill you doesn't just make you stronger, it makes you unrecognizable to the version of you that once begged to be chosen. That investigator closed your file and whispered one word, impossible. But heaven just smiled and whispered back, watch this. They thought you were protecting secrets. Turns out, you were the secret. Listen to me, beloved. Every file they pulled, every timeline they mapped, every shadow they traced led them absolutely nowhere. And you want to know why? Because you can't decode a soul that was written in heaven's own handwriting. You can't investigate someone who exists in multiple dimensions at once. They came looking for dirt and found diamonds. They came searching for weakness and discovered warfare. They thought they were reading a person, but they were trying to decipher a prophecy. You see, when God hides his weapons, he doesn't bury them in some distant mountain or lock them in golden vaults. He hides them in plain sight. He wraps them in human skin, gives them a heartbeat, and lets them walk among wolves. And that weapon, my friend, that's you. The investigator sat there with your file spread across the desk like a crime scene, thinking they could map your motivations, predict your patterns, explain your resilience. But every page they turned only deepened the mystery. Every fact they gathered only proved how little facts could capture. You weren't hiding something from them. You were the thing heaven was hiding from them. Your silence wasn't secrecy, it was encryption. Your stillness wasn't emptiness, it was depth they couldn't fathom. Your gentleness wasn't weakness, it was strength, so controlled it terrified them. You are a living, breathing code that only those aligned with divine truth can read. They tried to profile you like you were predictable. But how do you profile someone whose every choice defies human logic? How do you categorize someone who forgives the unforgivable, loves the unlovable, stands when standing makes no earthly sense? You operate by heaven's algorithms, not Earth's equations. Your moves don't follow human strategy because your commander isn't human. While they played checkers, you were receiving instructions from the cosmic chessboard. That investigator thought they were uncovering your secrets. What they actually uncovered was their own limitations. They found the edges of human understanding, the boundaries of earthly wisdom. They discovered that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to be experienced, honored, feared. You are written in ancient ink, beloved, inscribed with purpose before time began. Your story wasn't authored by circumstances. It was authored by the one who spoke stars into existence. And when men try to read what God has written, they find themselves face to face with their own inadequacy. They couldn't understand you because you're not meant to be understood by everyone. You're not a public document. You're a sacred text, accessible only to those who carry the right spiritual frequency. You're a divine encryption, a holy mystery walking among the mundane. The investigator closed your file that night and sat in the dark, not because they found nothing, but because they found everything. They found proof that some people aren't just surviving life, they're channeling eternity. They found evidence that the divine still walks among us, quietly, powerfully, changing everything it touches. You weren't the subject of their investigation, chosen one. You were their education, their awakening, their rude introduction to the fact that heaven still has agents on assignment. And the secret they discovered? You don't just carry God's fingerprints. You are his signature, written across time itself, impossible to forge, impossible to erase, impossible to ignore. They thought you were hiding something, but you were the thing heaven was hiding. Until now. They traced your scars like crime scenes, only to realize each one was a consecrated shrine. You know what they expected to find when they mapped out your pain, don't you? They thought they'd discover evidence of weakness, proof that life had broken you, marks that would explain why you moved differently, spoke differently, carried yourself with that quiet authority they couldn't quite place. But here's what happened when they touched your history with their cold investigative fingers. They found something that made them pull their hands back in reverence. Those scars weren't just healed wounds, they were holy ground. Every betrayal that should have destroyed your ability to trust again, you sanctified it. You didn't let it turn you bitter, you let it turn you wise. That abandonment that was supposed to leave you begging for scraps of love, you transformed it into a shrine of self-sufficiency, a sacred space where you learned that your worth was never up for debate. The abuse they thought would leave you broken and ashamed, you didn't just survive it, beloved. You consecrated it. You took that pain and built an altar of empathy so deep, so pure, that broken souls from miles away can feel the safety radiating from your presence. They expected to find a victim's timeline. Instead, they discovered a saint's journey. Because here's what the darkness never understood about you. Pain doesn't contaminate the chosen ones, it consecrates them. Every wound you endured wasn't punishment from heaven, it was preparation. Each scar wasn't evidence of your failure, it was proof of your fortification. You didn't wear your trauma like chains, you wore it like armor blessed by the divine. You didn't carry your hurt like baggage. You carried it like sacred scrolls, each page teaching you a deeper truth about resilience, about mercy, about the kind of strength that only comes from walking through hell and choosing to help others find their way out. What was meant to shame you now worships around your memory. That's the power they found when they dug into your story. Your past wasn't a graveyard of regrets. It was a cathedral of transformation. Every place where life tried to end, you became a place where new life began. You turned suffering into sacred sites. The investigator expected to find broken pieces. Instead, they found stained glass windows, beautiful, intricate, catching light in ways that plain glass never could. Each crack filled with something golden, each fracture made into art. You didn't just heal from your wounds, chosen one, you made them into monuments, shrines where others could come and remember that survival is possible, that resurrection is real. That scars can be more beautiful than skin that was never tested. They thought they were investigating damage. They discovered they were walking through a sanctuary, and in that sacred space, even the hardest hearts had to remove their shoes and bow their heads. Because they realized they weren't just looking at scars anymore. They were looking at miracles. Your pain became your pulpit, your wounds became your wings, and every scar, every single mark they thought would define your brokenness, they're singing hymns of your holiness now. Chapter 8. They came to expose you, but you held the mirror. They thought they had you cornered, camera ready, pens sharpened, headlines already written in their minds. They came armed with accusations, prepared to dissect your life like a specimen under laboratory lights. But what they didn't expect was to find themselves staring back. You see, chosen one, there's something about authentic souls that the darkness never anticipates. You don't just live your truth, you become a living mirror. And when people with hidden agendas get close enough to that kind of purity, something happens they're never prepared for. They see themselves, the real themselves, and it terrifies them. They came to expose your flaws, but your life exposed their emptiness. They searched for your secrets, but your transparency revealed their deception. They dug for dirt on you, but all they found was the soil of their own buried shame rising to the surface. You didn't dodge their exposure, you flipped it. While they were busy building their case against you, you were quietly building something they couldn't tear down: integrity. And integrity, my beloved, is the most dangerous weapon against darkness because it doesn't fight, it simply stands. And in that standing, everything false around it begins to crumble. You watch them scramble. Watch them fumble with their notes when your story didn't match their narrative. They came expecting to find a victim, someone broken enough to validate their own brokenness. Instead, they found someone who had turned their pain into purpose, their wounds into wisdom, their betrayal into breakthrough. The investigators' hands began to shake, not from excitement, but from recognition. Because in your story, they saw the reflection of every chance they'd wasted, every truth they'd buried, every person they'd wronged in their climb to nowhere. They came to uncover your shame, but they ended up staring at their own. Here's what broke them. You weren't hiding anything. You weren't performing righteousness or pretending perfection. You were simply whole. Whole in a way that only comes from walking through hell and choosing to forgive the flames. Whole in a way that speaks without words and convicts without condemnation. Your presence became their judgment. Not because you judged them, but because your peace highlighted their chaos. Your stability exposed their desperation. Your quiet strength revealed their noisy weakness. They wanted to write about your fall, but all they could document was your rise. They planned to publish your failure, but all they witnessed was your faith. They came to broadcast your breakdown, but all they found was your breakthrough. The mirror you held wasn't cruel, it was honest. And sometimes honesty is the most devastating weapon of all. They saw in you what they could have been, should have been, but chose not to be. And that realization, that cut deeper than any expose they could have written. You didn't need to defend yourself. Your life defended you. You didn't need to explain your choices. Your fruit spoke for itself. You didn't need to prove your worth. Your worth proved them wrong. In the end, they put down their pens, closed their notebooks, canceled their story. Because how do you expose someone whose greatest secrets are love, forgiveness, and unshakable faith? How do you tear down someone whose foundation is built on the rock of ages? You held up a mirror, chosen one, and they couldn't handle their own reflection. The hunter became the haunted. The investigator became the investigated. And you remained exactly who you've always been, a child of the Most High, wrapped in grace, walking in victory. They thought they came to expose you, but in the end, you exposed the lie they'd been living. And that, beloved, is the power of truth. It doesn't need to fight, it just needs to stand. My beloved chosen ones, as we reach the end of this revelation together, I need you to hold on to these truths like lifelines in the storm. Remember this: every investigation against you became an invitation for God to showcase His glory in your life. Every attempt to expose you only exposed the divine fingerprints all over your story. Every mirror they held up to shame you became a reflection of their own emptiness, while you stood clothed in the righteousness that no earthly court can overturn. You are not an accident. You are not a mistake. You are not the victim they tried to paint you as. You are God's masterpiece, refined by fire, proven by pressure, and vindicated by heaven itself. And I want you to know tonight, you are not walking this path alone. The same God who confused their tongues at Babel has confused the plans of your enemies. The same God who closed the mouths of lions is closing the mouths of those who would speak against you. And right here, right now, there's a community of believers who understand your journey, who have felt the weight of investigation, who know what it means to be misunderstood by the world but known completely by their Creator. Let me ask you something that will settle deep in your spirit tonight. If God allowed them to dig so deep into your life only to find His glory hidden in your story, what does that tell you about how precious you are to Him? What does that reveal about the plans He has for your future? Now, before you close this video, before you return to whatever battle you're facing, let me pray over you with the authority of someone who has walked with God for 50 years and has seen Him move mountains in the lives of His chosen ones. A prayer of divine protection and vindication. Father God, I come before your throne tonight not as a stranger, but as someone who knows your heart for these precious souls. Lord, I place my hand on the shoulder of every person hearing this prayer, and I speak life, vindication, and divine protection over them right now. God, you see the tears they've cried in secret. You know the accusations they've faced. You've counted every sleepless night, every moment they wondered if you had forgotten their name. But tonight, Lord, let them feel your presence like never before. I pray that every investigation against them becomes an opportunity for you to showcase your glory. Every attempt to shame them becomes a platform for your grace. Every mirror held up to expose them reflects only your love, your protection, and your unshakable plan for their life. Father, close every door that leads to destruction and open every door that leads to destiny. Silence every voice that speaks against your anointed and amplify every word that builds them up. Let them sleep tonight knowing that if you are for them, no investigation, no accusation, no enemy strategy can ever stand against them. Wrap them in your peace that surpasses understanding. Remind them that their story isn't defined by who investigated them, but by who intercedes for them, Jesus Christ, their advocate, their defender, their vindication. In the mighty name of Jesus, I declare that their breakthrough is coming, their vindication is secured, and their victory is guaranteed. Amen and amen. Now, I want to hear from you. In the comments below, share just one word that describes how this message spoke to your heart tonight. Don't worry about sharing your whole story, just one word that captures what God is doing in your spirit right now. Whether it's hope, peace, vindication, or something else entirely, let this community know you're here. And if this message blessed you, please share it with someone who needs to know they're not alone in their battle. There's someone in your circle, a family member, a friend, maybe even a stranger who needs to hear that God's investigation of their heart matters more than any earthly investigation of their life. Your comments, your shares, your presence here tonight creates a community of overcomers. Together, we remind each other that we are chosen, we are loved, and we are never, ever alone. Thank you for staying with me through this entire revelation. Thank you for trusting me with your time, your attention, and your heart. If this message has become a source of strength for you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and ring that notification bell. Because God isn't done speaking to your situation. He isn't done vindicating His people. And He isn't done using your story to encourage others who feel forgotten by the world, but remembered by heaven. Until we meet again, remember this: you are not just surviving your story. You are authoring your victory. And the best chapters are yet to be written. God bless you, my beloved. Sleep in His peace tonight. Your vindication is closer than you think.